Alright, welcome. The semifinals is underway officially here in the last ZOTAC Cup. It is two players of high Zerg caliber going out for their final slot. We'll see who can move on to the finals. Regardless, guys, it's a PvP finals on the other half of the semifinals, a ZVZ finals here. It's going to be a ZVP grand final. Nobody can complain about that. Spawning, though, in the top left corner of the map, a man who has recently returned to StarCraft 2, and more importantly, recently been granted access to America. Ladies and gentlemen, with my honor, it is my first time ever casting the blue Zerg player known as Violet. And of course, you can find him on Twitter, at VioletStarCraft. His opponent, though, in the lower right, a man who is currently high on the endorphins of victory, just taking down a gigantic, colossal titan known as Jakshi. Can he ride out that wave of momentum here in the grand semifinals? I guess you could call it. It is the purple Zerg player from Complexity Gaming, the Canadian Hendralisk. And do stop by his Twitter at Cole_Hendralisk. But I'm not kidding, guys. This is literally my first time ever casting Violet, so really, really excited about this. And if you think you've got nerdgasms going on, you bet I do right now. So one of the big things for this matchup, to talk, well, actually, we'll talk about the matchup and what could possibly happen and the boring stuff in a second. To explain real quick, because a lot of people are like, why is this the last cup? If you've missed the explanation so far, I don't work for ZOTAC, I do not represent ZOTAC, and I do not speak on behalf of them. But I've cast almost every single ZOTAC Cup in the last, year and a half. And from an educated perspective, one of the big things is there's a really low viewership, despite the fact that there's constantly great players, both Korean and North American, and even sometimes European, that compete, combined with the fact that the signups are incredibly low. Like there's seriously, on an average day, 100, 150, maybe on a good day for a ZOTAC North American sign up. And for Europe, it's more like 300 on the average day. So they've decided to relocate the funds of the Warcraft 3 tournaments and the ZOTAC tournaments into 2 new Hearthstone tournaments, which from a company perspective makes total sense for ZOTAC, and I applaud them for continuing to broaden their horizons. For us, it sucks. We're losing a big tournament here in the North American scene. ZOTAC is literally the longest running, still ongoing tournament to date for StarCraft 2, even before ESL. And unfortunately, the North American branch is being brought to a close today. So a little bit sad, but again, as I've been saying all day, and last week even, we choose to celebrate it instead. And we've got some pretty good games for it. So good karma, thumbs up, keep it going, guys, with the energy, because we'll see how this ZVZ turns out. Now, the boring stuff of what I was talking about, predicting what happens here. Violet is a player who I've had to watch from afar, unfortunately. But one thing I have noticed is he's been playing in things like IEM, signing up for the odd cup here or there, and I've wanted to try and cast him. Now, unfortunately, he usually ends up going down to the losers bracket pretty quickly. He was falling out of tournaments faster than we could get to him. Not to call him a bad player, but perhaps not the unstoppable force he once was. We'll get an Overlord here. Nice little snipe.
First blood.
But maybe he's brought it back together, feeling confident here in this weekly cup, knowing there's not a lot of pressure on the lines. Like, it's not an IEM Sao Paulo, right? Like, this is just ZOTAC. I say just in huge air quotes. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see how this one fares out. Hendralisk's ZVZ is actually pretty darn good. If any of you got the pleasure of joining me for the WCG casts, the national finals, he played against Jig to secure his slot over in China to represent Canada, and he had one of the most amazing ZVZ series ever. He is one of the few Zerg players I've seen actively go for swarm hosts, but typically that's not something you can rush towards. Usually you open up with your there's 3 classic openings, right? Like Zerglings and Banelings, maybe Roaches, or maybe Mutalisks, but rarely do you ever get to be like, okay, you know what, I'm gonna knight a swarm host and hope for the best. And he played against a Canadian Zerg player named Jig, who, not to take any credit away from him, might not be Korean, but had some really interesting tactics to try and get past the swarm host, because it's not something you typically see in ZVZ. And one of my favorite things that we got to see was him trying to use Vengeful Sacks to float over top of the Locust and directly on top of the swarm hosts. And Hendralisk was still, despite those tactics, able to adapt, able to win. So even if he loses this first game, I'm fairly confident he could tag Violet back, or at least take a game off of Violet. But again, Hendralisk definitely comes into this series as a bit of the underdog. Hopefully, though, he can he can hold it together. Again, there's a certain level of me that's like, hey, he's Canadian, I'm Canadian, gotta root for my brother. But also because I want the last, if we could have the last ever North American ZOTAC Cup be won by a North American, and Hendralisk is the only North American here, I think that would be pretty fantastic. But you guys vote for who you want to, and make sure to cheer with your heart and do it, whether it's for Violet or whether it's for Hendralisk, because these are two guys who have certainly earned it at this point. Hendralisk off of that last game, and of course Violet over his career. But Roaches will be coming out of Violet here, and he's trying to get his third up. I think he's gonna pick up a creep tumor, not the biggest deal in the world, but still, it's a free thing to pick. Well, it's not really free, I guess. You left some links for it, so take that back. Hendralisk a little bit behind on going for his own Roaches, but a little bit quicker on taking that third. We'll see if the economy comes into play or not. For Roaches, these early upgrades are not not as big of a deal as they normally would be. Like, it's usually about raw numbers more than anything else early on. So having 50 Roaches versus 40 Roaches, who cares if you got one level upgrade if you're outnumbered and out-surrounded. Third bases are going to be huge points of contestation, I feel. Whether it's down here towards Hendralisk's third or at Violet's third, they're very wide, very exposed, and not easy to deal with. I do need to give a shout out to Huck, by the way, who on Heavy Rain did the coolest thing where he trapped his opponent in with the rock towers. And a lot of people have not been utilizing the rock towers on either Habitation Station or Heavy Rain, but they are there, they are collapsible, and it's always an option. But we'll see if that comes into play or not. Because again, that's something you could do. Like, you know, half of the Roaches get cut off. This is the world's biggest force field, you know what I mean? But whether it's offensively or defensively, he's got a Spine Crawler here and a couple of Roaches. He should be able to do pretty decently here. The Lings are going to soak up that one volley, which is going to pay off actually in a quite big way. Hendralisk has the Roach deficit, but again, Defender's advantage and that Spine Crawler are going to drive Violet back just a tad. Queen going to be focused down here too, and Hendralisk, but he's struggling to say the least here with these front lines. But again, these Lings, I love these incorporating and weaving in a couple Lings to this. Even if all they do is soak up one volley, that's one less volley in the Roaches. That means maybe suddenly you're a Roach ahead of your opponent, and then you get this round, and the numbers game comes into effect. But for now, losing that Queen was a little unfortunate. 4 queens to 2, not the biggest deal in the world, but still, it's going to hamper Hendralisk's production here for a moment. He is replacing it pretty quickly, though. There are a lot of times we see Zerg players lose their queens early on, and then never replace them, and you're like, oh, how did I fall behind an army? Oh, I didn't have the supply count, apparently. But it's going to take down those rocks, so knocks those down. This will be great, actually, because what this does for now is at least it secures the fact that Violet can't just run through here and catch him off guard. It does close off one of those paths, but it's not like it's impossible for Roaches to quickly take out 2,000 health rocks when you've got 50 of them. But +2 weapons have been started for both. Violet has, of course, got his armor upgrades coming out now, something Hendralisk has had going for him, but it's going to come down to just straight up Roach Wars. Defensively with a Spine Crawler will always go a little bit more in your favor, but if you're offensive, you get to dictate where the fights go down and when you want to fight. So it's kind of that trade-off, like what are you willing to sacrifice? Big swig of water, sorry about that, guys. But the Hydra's thing coming up for Hendralisk is a little bit worrying. I kind of wince at seeing Hydra stun come out early like this, because like a maxed out Roach army beats out a maxed out Roach Hydra army most of the time, because the Hydralisks actually don't get a whole lot of usage. They're a nice DPS addition to the fight, but they are, in a essence, glass cannons. They've got 80 health, they attack really hard and really fast, but they go down pretty quick to Roaches. Hendralisk was trying to get a couple of run-bys off here. We'll get one of these Roaches nestled in here, but this Queen's waiting as well as a Spine Crawler, so has to back off immediately. Burrow tactics are really great when you start implementing these run-bys, but Violet says, screw that. I'm just coming down here with a big force of Roaches right down the middle of the map. And Hendralisk is behind in supply, guys. He's down in the Roach count by a really significant amount, and that Spine Crawler will not help make up the difference. If the Hydras are too close to the front lines, as they are, Violet just moves forward and focuses them down. Hendralisk doesn't have the Roaches to keep these Hydralisks alive. Drones are going to be pulled, but game 1 might be decided right here, and Violet is looking really good. Takes the nice surround here. Huge concave on the Roaches. The Hydras now being focused. Again, lots of damage, but really low health. Go down very quickly. Hendralisk only has a small amount of Roaches to clean up, but can't quite do it. Game number 1, ladies and gentlemen, will go to Violet.